In the frontier town of Red Creek, people rarely needed facts to ruin a reputation. By the time Sarah Belle Thornton turned 21, nearly every resident had accepted a story about her that no one could prove. Mothers warned their sons away, merchants lowered their voices when she entered, and churchgoers exchanged knowing looks whenever she passed. Sarah carried those judgments silently, refusing to beg for understanding. Yet each whisper followed her through streets she could never truly leave, haunting every errand and every visit she made in town daily. Sarah lived in a modest house at the edge of town with her grandmother, Alina, whose age had bent her back but never weakened her spirit. Every morning Sarah mended clothing, stitched blankets, and repaired worn coats for families across Red Creek. Many accepted her work because it was excellent, though some still acted as if taking her help stained their good names. Sarah answered rudeness with patience, cared for neighbors during illnesses, and shared food when times were hard, expecting little thanks in return from those she faithfully served. The rumors had begun years earlier after a painful family tragedy. Sarah's father had fallen into disgrace following accusations that he had stolen money from a ranching partnership. Then illness struck the household. During that difficult season, Sarah disappeared from Red Creek for several months. When she eventually returned, exhausted and grieving, questions spread faster than answers. Because she rarely discussed the absence, townspeople invented explanations. Some claimed she had run away in shame. Others hinted at scandals too cruel to repeat openly. Before long, imagination replaced truth, and suspicion hardened into certainty. One afternoon, an accident near the general store reminded Sarah how quickly people judged. A young boy stumbled from a wagon and scraped his arm. While adults hesitated, Sarah rushed forward, cleaned the wound, and comforted the frightened child. She stayed until his tears stopped. Across the street, a tall rider watched the scene with interest. Ezekiel's Zeke, Walker, had recently returned to Red Creek after years away. He noticed not gossip, but kindness, composure, and quiet strength. Those qualities lingered in his thoughts long after the crowd dispersed again. Zeke Walker was 25, broad-shouldered, hardworking, and respected throughout the county. After his father's death, he had inherited a successful ranch and returned determined to build an honorable future. People admired his character almost as much as his business sense. Several prominent families quietly hoped he would marry one of their daughters. Therefore, when townsfolk noticed his attention drifting toward Sarah Thornton, concern spread quickly. Men offered warnings disguised as friendly advice, while women repeated old rumors. Zeke listened politely, yet every conversation left him more curious than convinced before. Their first real conversation happened beside Alina's garden. Zeke stopped to return a sewing basket Sarah had accidentally left near the store. Expecting another awkward exchange, she thanked him briefly and prepared to leave. Instead, Zeke asked about her work and listened carefully to every answer. He spoke to her as though she were simply another person, not a cautionary tale. The normal respect unsettled Sarah more than open hostility. She found herself smiling despite caution, then quickly hiding the expression before others could notice it and start talking again. Days later, a church social brought much of Red Creek together. Families filled the meeting hall, sharing food and conversation. Sarah attended only because her grandmother insisted. For a short while, everything remained peaceful. Then the wife of a wealthy rancher loudly questioned why Sarah had been invited at all. The room fell silent. Several people looked away, unwilling to defend her. Others watched eagerly, expecting humiliation. Sarah felt familiar embarrassment rising and quietly gathered her belongings, determined to leave before the situation became even worse for her that evening. Before Sarah could reach the door, Zeke rose from his chair. Calmly, he asked a simple question. What evidence did anyone actually possess against her? No one answered. The rancher's wife repeated gossip but offered no facts. Zeke continued, pointing out that rumors were not proof and assumptions were not truth. The silence deepened. People shifted uncomfortably as they realized they had accepted accusations without examination. Sarah stared at him, astonished that someone was finally challenging the story everyone else treated as unquestionable fact for many long years in town. Zeke walked beside Sarah outside after the gathering. Curious faces watched from windows and porches. Sarah thanked him for speaking up, though she warned that defending her would only damage his reputation. Zeke surprised her with a faint smile. He explained that reputations built upon fear mattered less than truth. During the brief walk, he observed how she carried herself despite years of rejection. Instead of bitterness, he saw resilience. Instead of selfishness, he saw compassion. Every warning he had received now seemed increasingly absurd to him alone that night. The following morning, Red Creek buzzed with astonishment. Conversations in shops, barns, and kitchens centered on one moment. Ezekiel Walker had publicly defended Sarah Thornton. Some called him foolish. Others insisted he would soon regret his choice. Yet the phrase he had spoken spread faster than any rumor before it. When questioned by several townsmen, Zeke answered without hesitation. He said, "I don't see someone stained. I see someone sacred." By sunset, every corner of town had heard those words, and disbelief lingered across every street, doorway, household, and heart. The days following Zeke Walker's declaration transformed Red Creek into a town obsessed with speculation. People who had ignored Sarah for years suddenly watched her every move. Some expected Zeke to withdraw his support once he learned the stories repeated about her. Others believed he was merely acting out of stubborn pride. Instead, he continued greeting Sarah openly, speaking with her in public, and treating her with the same respect he offered everyone else. Each act of kindness challenged the assumptions that had ruled the town for years and made the gossip grow louder. Sarah found herself caught between gratitude and fear. She appreciated Zeke's friendship, yet experience had taught her that trust often ended in disappointment. More than once, people had shown her kindness before eventually surrendering to the rumors. She worried that the same thing would happen again. Whenever Zeke invited her for a walk or stopped by to visit a leaner, she kept part of herself guarded. Yet with every conversation, she discovered qualities she admired. He listened more than he spoke, laughed easily, and never treated her as someone who needed rescuing. Meanwhile, resistance against their growing friendship intensified. Several merchants who depended on wealthy ranching families began distancing themselves from Zeke. Church elders gently suggested he should be careful about the company he kept. Young women who had hoped to win his affection expressed their disappointment with increasing hostility. Some spread fresh rumors claiming Sarah had manipulated him. Others insisted Zeke's judgment had been clouded. The pressure came from every direction, but he refused to bend. If anything, the criticism strengthened his determination to learn why so many people feared the truth. One evening, while reviewing old records related to his father's business dealings, Zeke noticed something peculiar. The rumors surrounding Sarah varied wildly depending on who told them. One person claimed she had fled town in disgrace. Another insisted she had been abandoned. A third described an entirely different scandal. None of the stories matched. More importantly, nobody could identify where the accusations had originated. Every trail ended with someone saying they had heard it from someone else. The deeper Zeke looked, the more convinced he became that Red Creek had built its judgment upon a foundation of smoke. Sarah remained reluctant to discuss her past. However, after weeks of friendship, she finally agreed to tell Zeke what had really happened. They sat beneath a cottonwood tree near a leaner's property while the afternoon faded into evening. Taking a steadying breath, Sarah revealed that her father's troubles had begun when he was accused of stealing money from a ranching partnership. The allegations shattered his reputation almost overnight. Determined to help him, She had traveled to another county searching for records and witnesses that could prove his innocence. Before she could complete her efforts, tragedy struck. Her father's health worsened during her absence. By the time Sarah returned to Red Creek, he had passed away. Grief consumed her family, leaving little strength to confront the growing rumors. Yet there was another part of the story she had never shared. During her search for evidence, she found temporary work at a charitable mission that sheltered abandoned women and orphaned children. She cooked meals, cleaned rooms, and cared for those with nowhere else to go. The work was difficult but meaningful. Unfortunately, someone had seen her there and twisted the experience into something shameful. Zeke listened carefully, his respect for her deepening with every word. The story explained much, yet it raised another question. Who had benefited from destroying Sarah's reputation? Determined to find answers, he continued investigating. He visited neighboring towns, examined old ledgers, and spoke with retired ranch hands who remembered the events from years earlier. Gradually, a troubling pattern emerged. Again and again, one name surfaced near every crucial moment: Harold Finch, the wealthiest rancher in Red Creek and one of the town's most influential men. Harold Finch presented himself as a pillar of the community. He donated generously to public projects, sat on church committees, and enjoyed the admiration of many residents. Yet Zeke's investigation uncovered inconsistencies hidden beneath that respectable image. Old financial records suggested money had disappeared from business accounts around the same time Sarah's father was accused. Witnesses remembered Harold steering conversations toward suspicion whenever questions arose. Most revealing of all were several letters preserved by a retired bookkeeper. Together, they suggested that Harold, not Sarah's father, had been responsible for the missing funds years earlier. When Zeke finally confronted Harold privately, the meeting quickly turned tense. Harold listened without visible concern as the evidence was presented. Then he leaned back and smiled. He warned Zeke that powerful people could make life difficult for a rancher. Contracts could disappear. Suppliers could become uncooperative. Opportunities could vanish. If Zeke valued his future, he should stop digging into matters better left buried. The threat was calm, almost friendly, which made it even more unsettling. For the first time, Zeke understood how much influence Harold truly possessed throughout the region. Sarah was alarmed when she learned about the confrontation. She urged Zeke to abandon the investigation before he sacrificed everything he had worked for. Losing his ranch because of her would be unbearable. Yet Zeke refused to retreat. Truth mattered too much. As preparations began for Red Creek's annual community gathering, he quietly organized witnesses, collected documents, and arranged every piece of evidence. Word spread that something significant was coming. On the evening before the event, Zeke announced he intended to reveal the full truth publicly. Across town, Harold Finch merely smiled confidently, while Sarah feared disaster awaited them. The town of Red Creek gathered at the community hall with tension hanging in the air, as word spread that Ezekiel Walker was about to reveal everything he had uncovered about Harold Finch and the accusations against Sarah Belle Thornton. Harold arrived with calm confidence, believing that no one would dare challenge his standing in the town he had helped build and control for years. Zeke stepped forward carrying a stack of documents that had taken him weeks to collect from different counties, and retired workers and old records that had long been forgotten. He began reading aloud each piece of evidence, carefully showing how money had disappeared from ranching accounts, and how signatures had been forged to shift blame onto Sarah Belle Thornton. Family witnesses stepped forward one by one, confirming that Harold Finch had controlled the narrative from the beginning, using his influence to silence anyone who questioned him. The crowd shifted uneasily, as truth replaced rumor and years of judgment began to collapse under the weight of facts they had ignored for too long. Harold Finch tried to speak, but his voice faltered as former allies looked away, unable to defend what had been exposed before them within moments. His reputation collapsed completely, as years of manipulation and deception were laid bare for all to see. The town that once believed every rumor now stood silent, confronted by the harm it had caused to an innocent woman. Zeke stepped beside Sarah and took her hand, gently telling the crowd that truth without courage means nothing, and that silence had allowed. In the aftermath, apologies spread through Red Creek as people finally understood how easily they had been misled and how deeply Sarah had suffered. Sarah, however, did not seek revenge, choosing instead forgiveness, which surprised even those who had hurt her the most. Her strength in that moment changed many hearts more than any accusation ever could. Zeke then turned toward her and spoke clearly, saying that from the moment he met her, he had seen something sacred that others refused to recognize. He knelt in front of Sarah, looked at him through tears, and said yes, as the hall erupted in stunned celebration, and long-held tension finally broke into joy. Months later, the town gathered once more, not for judgment, but for a wedding that marked a new beginning for everyone involved. Sarah walked down the aisle no longer as a rumor, but as a woman finally seen truly, while Zeke waited for her with the kind of love that had changed everything. After the wedding announcement, life in Red Creek began to shift in ways no one had expected, as businesses once controlled by fear slowly opened their doors to fairness. Harold Finch left town quietly, his influence dissolved as contracts were reviewed, and stolen wealth was returned to its rightful owners. Zeke did not celebrate Harold's downfall, instead focusing on repairing relationships and rebuilding trust within the community. Sarah continued her work, helping families and expanding the small sewing. On the morning of the wedding, the town prepared with a quiet sense of reflection, as people who had once judged Sarah found themselves hoping for her happiness. The ceremony took place under the wide open sky, near Alina's home, surrounded by wild flowers and neighbors who had finally learned humility. Zeke spoke his vows with steady certainty, promising to stand beside Sarah not as someone who saved her, but as someone who respected her strength. Sarah, in return, promised trust, not because life had been easy. When they kissed, the crowd cheered, and for the first time in years, Red Creek felt united, not by rumor, but by truth and hope that something better had finally taken root. After the celebration, Sarah and Zeke remained in front of the guests, accepting congratulations, while Alina watched with tears of relief, knowing her granddaughter was finally safe. Zeke later promised Sarah that their life would be built not on perfection, but on truth, patience, and respect, shared equally in the weeks that followed the wedding. Red Creek